Yeah, and it's interesting that they knew what to say to the Westerners. Like, we're going to democratize any day now. Just
And also,
you're so smart.
And also, would you like to make money in China?
Yes.
I feel like that colors everyone's view. Is like in an era under Jiang Zemin or Hu Jintao, when it was like the opportunities to make money seemed so much more accessible than today. It's like, of course, there's lots about China to love, right? And like, who cares what Jiang Zemin is doing to Falun Gong or what Hu Jintao is doing to Tibetans or whatever? Like China's trying to fix those problems.
That's right.
It's not even an exaggeration.
Yeah.
That's right. I think they did a really good job of selling this line, and to me that really speaks to a kind of shared vision in the Chinese Communist Party that is probably more of a consensus view than you have in most Western countries for where the country is going and what objectives they're trying to achieve in the long term. And I think this meant that, even though you had voices inside the Chinese Communist Party, and you still do, who want a more peaceful relationship with the US, who don't want to confront and compete with the United States, who probably want more economic reform and some slight liberalization, I think they're basically all in agreement that, they want to strengthen the Chinese Communist Party, that they want to move towards, a more powerful Chinese Communist Party, and that this is somehow really not compatible with the way that the US sees the world. But let's just keep quiet about that until we can't avoid it and we can't ignore it.
Right. I mean, everybody wants peace. Well, almost everybody wants peace. But the thing is, people want peace, but on their own terms. So when China says they want peace, when the Communist Party says it, like they do want peace because they want everyone to peacefully surrender and capitulate to whatever they want. They want to have a peaceful unification with Taiwan by not having to send in the troops. They just want Taiwan to, agree on, to become part of the PRC on the PRC's terms, right? But when America wants peace, we want to have peace, but we also want to have it on our terms, albeit, without the same kind of persecution that happens in China. So I think then I had a really good point here, and I was getting to it, and then I lost the thread of that. So maybe you could follow up, Alex.
Well, I think this just speaks to the long-term importance of influence operations to the Chinese Communist Party. This isn't something that they sort of just came up with in the aftermath of the Tiananmen massacre. This is something that goes back well before the MSS even existed. It was founded in 1983, but when did the Chinese Communist Party start doing United Front work? That goes back to 1922, the year after it was founded by the Soviet Comintern. So this is a tradition that predates military work, predates foreign affairs work, even predates technically intelligence work inside the Chinese Communist Party, and that's just influence operations. So they might, there are periods where they haven't been very good at it, but I think it's such a feature of Chinese internal politics, this sort of backroom dealing, this intrigue, this scheming, and it's quite natural for them, I think, for Chinese political leaders to play that out internationally as well and to emphasize that. And that's exactly what we're seeing Xi Jinping do, promoting the head of the United Front Work Department, elevating the importance of its work. And we're just going to see more and more of these MSS influence operations that are increasingly professional.
And what I think is so dangerous about this is essentially what the Communist Party is able to do is to get third parties to essentially become promoters of whatever message that they've been fed by the Chinese Communist Party. It's like the Chinese Communist Party is a virus and it's exporting this virus around the world. I'm thinking specifically of the case of Goldman Sachs executive John Thornton, who was basically able to trick the Trump administration in how to approach China.
Thornton's a fascinating case, and I think, quite similar to Bob Hawke in many ways, that this is someone who who wanted to carve out a place for himself in the world after leaving Goldman Sachs in 2003 or so. And what he did was he signed up as a professor at Tsinghua University. I think the first foreign professor there since Bertrand Russell in the 1920s. And he was running an executive sort of leadership program for the future leaders of the Chinese Communist Party. But a lot of his access inside China, as I found, was through people like Wang Qishan, but also through this MSS-run front organization called China Reform Forum, which really specialized in pushing this idea that China was reforming, that it was liberalizing, that it was becoming more democratic, and that the US needed to welcome China and its rise onto the international world and not view it as a threat. And he was named as a foreign advisor to China Reform Forum. He would go for meetings with its staff, not realizing that these were quite literally the same undercover MSS officers who were handling clandestine assets inside the United States. And I think you can see the impact of that in some of the things that he said publicly. He really fits this mold of someone who feels like they've been given special insight into China's direction. So he came out in 2008 with an article for Foreign Affairs magazine writing about how China was moving towards a democracy, pointing to these grassroots village elections, and how his sources at the top of the Chinese Communist Party were really talking about more democracy within the party, but eventually, more actual elections within China. And this is something that really wasn't backed up by, actual political analysis and scholarly work of China at the time, but he'd been sold this, it seems, by his contacts inside the Chinese Communist Party. And then what happened in the Trump administration, in the Barnard years, he supposedly wanted to become ambassador to China, but in the Trump administration, he kind of quite surprisingly rekindled this friendship with, of all people, Steve Bannon, who he'd worked with at Goldman Sachs back in the day, and tried to position himself as a backdoor messenger between the White House and Chinese leaders. There are some things that they just didn't want to go through the State Department for or through the embassy for because they were sensitive and they thought they might leak. So going through Thornton was seen as a better channel for these activities. But I talked to people who were working inside the White House at the time who claimed that Thornton was really trying to put his own agenda on this, to use his position as a backdoor messenger to help kind of position more sympathetic voices as leads on China policy within the White House. People like Jared Kushner, and this didn't work out in the end. Thankfully, they got Robert Lighthizer, who was a tough negotiator with China. But the fact that someone who had a lot of access to undercover MSS officers who had his opinions shaped by them, as this Foreign Affairs article, I think, indicates, was able to play this role inside the White House. And then no one inside the White House was actually warned about his connections, about security around these kinds of activities, really speaks to the failure of Western governments to appreciate influence operations and really understand how to respond to them.